Out of our fundamental humanity, if you will, we can understand the beauty of other people, the sincerity and the search for God in other religions, the values that we share to make life more livable, more humane, and are even working together to make a better world. There are too many poor in this world. There are too many hungry. There are too many homeless. There are too many frightened children. There are too many deaths that are violent. Together we can all work on these, and it would be so much better to be working together in that framework rather than shooting at each other across stone fences.
Please welcome Justice and Peacebuilding Senior Technical Advisor of Catholic Relief Services, Nell Bolton.
In the summer of 2005, I was living in Nigeria, working on peace and justice issues with Catholic Relief Services there and around Central Africa. I had the chance to work with wonderful local organizations that were committed to peace, to good governance, to human dignity. It was amazing and meaningful and fulfilling work, and I had no intention of leaving it. But when Hurricane Katrina and the subsequent levee failures devastated my hometown of New Orleans, Louisiana, I soon knew that I needed to return back home. I couldn't, with any integrity, keep working on peace and justice in other societies when we so clearly had issues of our own to deal with. And so within a few months, I found myself on my way back home. And I soon plunged in to great collaborative efforts to try to ensure that everyone, but especially the poor and the marginalized and the displaced, had a voice and a place in the recovery of New Orleans. And what these experiences affirmed for me was the power of people to transcend barriers and divisions in pursuit of the common good. This was a time when emotions were raw and tensions were running high in the wake of so much loss and so much heartache. There was a lot of fear and distrust on all parts. Effective public leadership was essentially absent, which left the burden for driving the recovery forward on the shoulders of regular, everyday people. And yet, what I witnessed time and again were people who were willing to cross barriers that they rarely would have crossed before, to move into other neighborhoods and sit down with other people who were sharing similar experiences, but from very different historical backgrounds, and figure out common solutions to the problems that they faced together. I saw people being willing to give each other the benefit of the doubt just long enough to figure out those workable solutions. And one of the biggest barriers to return being housing and the ability to have a place to live. We spent a lot of time working on affordable housing, especially for the renters who are left out of many of the rebuilding programs and funding cycles. And it was perhaps surprising, but we found very diverse partners in these coalitions, people from very different economic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, class backgrounds, neighborhood backgrounds, who are willing to come together and collaborate on these efforts. This was an affirmation to me of the ability of people as citizens, as human beings, to work together for the common good, to deal with division, disagreement, difference, but to do it in a way that allows us to hash those things out and then move forward. And this felt significant to me at the time, not just for New Orleans, but for American life more generally. This was in the mid-2000s when the TV show Survivor was at the peak of its popularity. What that show and many of the cultural messages behind it were saying was that if you didn't like someone, you didn't have to deal with them. You didn't have to engage with them, much less try to find compromise with them. You just voted them off the island. And I thought this was a troubling indicator of how we, in our civic life, were dealing with difference and with disagreement. We were beginning to sort of slip down a slippery slope towards a standard mode in which demonization and polarization were the order of the day. This troubled me then, and it troubles me even more so now. After all, no society expects to slip off a cliff into civil war. No one expects that the too many violent deaths will one day become massive casualties. And certainly there are political and economic forces that drive war, but a powerful antidote to the centrifugal forces that pull societies apart, that tear people apart from one another, are opportunities to collaborate, opportunities to explore and discover and affirm the common good. So one of our most fundamental responsibilities as peace builders is to create pathways for people to find avenues to identify and discover and act on their commonalities and the things that hold them together. I've been back at CRS for several years now, and one of the most powerful pathways that we've found for doing this is something that we call the 3 Bs: binding, bonding, and bridging. Binding refers to the process of personal healing, self-transformation. It literally is about giving people the opportunity to bind up their own deep emotional and psychic wounds, the wounds to their own sense of fundamental humanity, and helping them to discover and activate their own capacities for forgiveness, for reconciliation, for leadership. Bonding, the next B, is about working within our own groups to hash out the issues and the differences and the disagreements that we may have. We all know that sometimes those tensions can be most heated among the people that we're closest to, members of our own networks, members of our own religious or ethnic groups. And bonding creates a safe space for exploring those and finding and building consensus. And the final B, bridging, is about reaching out and building dialogue and collaboration across the divisions that separate groups from one another, that keep them polarized. Bridging, it can be everything from opportunities to come together and have these dialogues, as well as acts of cooperation, including the literal act of building a bridge in a community, repairing a school, or launching a business together with people who are on opposite sides of a conflict situation. We've seen that taken together, these 3 Bs can make a fundamental shift in the conflict landscape. We've seen in Bosnia-Herzegovina survivors of wartime trauma become models and advocates for reconciliation across ethnic divides. We're even seeing some political leaders begin to follow suit at local and national levels. In South Sudan, we've had community members tell us that even a single workshop that helped them to process their own trauma, to strengthen their self-care, to explore concepts around forgiveness and leadership, has made significant differences in how they're dealing with conflict and violence in their own homes, and how much cooperation there is between ethnic groups, different ethnic groups within their communities. In Mindanao, in the southern Philippines, we've worked with traditional and religious leaders to discover and strengthen the personal and spiritual capabilities that they bring. And with that empowerment, they have been effectively resolving intractable land conflicts that often run a risk of turning violent. We've also seen that young people who have participated in bridging activities that unite them are using their new relationships, their new attitudes, their new skills to change the way that they're engaging with authority figures and contributing to their own communities. We've even seen impacts of this 3B process among officials at quite higher levels. For example, government officials, militia leaders who have participated in these processes in Central African Republic are bringing those experiences into higher level negotiations. All of this is a reminder, I think, to me, that the 3 B's give us a way to connect with and strengthen our shared sense of interdependence, our sense of our fundamental humanity, the belief and the experience that we can actually find ways to work together across those stone walls rather than shooting at one another. And this gives me hope. Thank you.